Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Cory Kerr, and today I am going to go over how to put keyframes or changeable variables inside of expressions, or in other words, how you can have a bunch of different things controlled by one thing, and you have that one thing have an expression on it. All kinds of interesting things like that. So how to animate and change keyframes over time and all that stuff. And we're specifically going to be using the wiggle expression today. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Illo Talk.
All right, so what we're going to do here is I've got this guy on the right, Newsy, and I animated him and I learned a ton of stuff. Some things I didn't learn in this particular project. Other things I did. Anyway, I'm just going to do a series of tutorials. So basically, I've got a bunch of different text objects here, right? So just a bunch of different objects inside of Adobe After Effects. And I'm going to make those move. So, for example, if I take my X position here, okay, and I hit P for position, okay, I like to kind of split X and Y. So I'm going to right click on the position there, and I'm going to go separate dimensions. Now you'll notice that I have an X and Y, and for X position, I'm going to turn X on here. But if I hold Alt and click, then it opens up my expressions menu. And you can do one of two things. You can come over to this little circle with a triangle and go to property and find wiggle. Or if you already know that you're going to do wiggle, then you can just type the word wiggle and it'll start coming up. So once you get there, you can hit return. That's going to put you inside. Now, the two most important parts about wiggle are the first two things. And the way that those go is the frequency, then there's a comma, and then there's the amplitude. Let me talk to you about frequency and amplitude really quick. Frequency is the amount of times cycles per second. So if I put 1, then it'll happen 1 time per second. If I put 5, it'll happen faster, 5 times per second. If I put 0.5, it'll happen slower. It'll happen half a time per second, or it'll happen every 2 seconds. Same thing. Okay. Amplitude is going to depend on what you're doing this on. And so if I'm in here like this and I do this on a position, the amplitude is going to be pixels, right? How many pixels are you going to move left or right? Scale is going to be percentage, okay? How many percentage points are you going to kind of wiggle between? Rotation is degrees. And opacity is also percentage, right? And so in this case, I'm going to say every second, so I'm going to put 1 there, and then comma, I want this to wiggle 50 pixels. And what that's going to do is going to randomly generate movement within 50 pixels. And it's not that it oscillates back and forth, it's that it's a random number generator, right? And so you see it kind of changes a little bit. If I want to speed that up, then I can come here and I can say I want this to happen 6 times per second in the frequency place, and I want it to be bigger. I want it to happen 500 pixels. Okay, and now it's like all over the place and it's quicker. Now I say I like the 500 pixels, but I'm going to turn the frequency down to like half. Okay, and so now it's got that big movement in the amplitude, but it's got that slow cycle in the frequency, right? So you follow me? Okay, now let's do some quick math. Don't get lost here. This isn't hard math, okay? And so if I say something like this, if I say A plus B equals C, and I ask you, what does C equal? You say, I don't have enough information for that. All right, so let's go and look at this. What if I tell you A plus B equals C, right? But I also tell you A equals 5 and B equals 2. Well, I know that. That's 7, right? So I can come over here and I can say that is 7. Okay? But what if A equals 3? Well, this equation has not changed. The equation is still the same. It's still a plus b equals c, right? Except the value of a has changed. That's what a variable is. Now a is 3, so c is no longer 7, it's 5. And so this is how this works, right? And so what we can do is we can come over here and we can say, you know, let's do kind of like a timeline here, right? So I'm going to say a over time, so we'll have a little timeline, and we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then b over time, okay, like that. And I can say a is 1, and then it's 3, and then it's 5, right? And b is 0 and 0 and 2 and 15, and we'll make that 0, okay? So now I say, what does c equal? And you have to ask what? At what time are you talking about? Because we've got our little timeline here. Because c at 1 second equals 1, right? But c at 2 seconds equals 3. C at 3 seconds equals 7, right? C at 4 seconds equals 15, okay? And so that's how we're going to do this. This is the basic math, right? Is that we're going to take something and we're going to add variables inside of an expression that can change over time. And so if these were keyframes, right, or lovely little keyframes, then that would be really cool. So check this out, right? So what if I just came in here and I said, I don't want to do this. Oops, hit escape. There we go. Okay, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go, instead of having actual numbers in here, I'm going to put variables. I'm going to say x. Well, let's just do a and b since that's what we were doing before. A and b, okay? And so it's going to give me an error, and it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. That's what this orange error is here. Wiggle, okay, A and B. This entire thing is going to spit out a single number, and that number is going to change over time. And so as at this playhead right here, it's going to change. So let me show you what I mean by this. Right here, I'm just going to say 1, and I'm going to make this be 10. Okay, so watch this red number over here. Right now it says 628, but when I move it, it says 625, 625, 631, right? At each frame, it is a specific number. So in our example here, that's C, right? Okay, so whatever this is, okay, it's whatever's going on inside of here equals C. Okay, now this will look confusing, but it's not confusing. So let me do this real fast. I'm going to go up to layer, and I'm going to create a null object. Now a null object is just a nothing, right? It has attributes, but it doesn't render out. It doesn't export or anything. So you can use it and see it and parent things to it or whatever, but it's not a thing that ends up in the final product. Okay, so I'm going to go null, and I'm just going to call this, let's just call this variable null. All right, so we've got our variable here, okay, and I'm going to come in here like this, and I'm going to hit P, okay, and I'm going to separate dimensions, and now I have one number for my x value and one number for my y value. This is the null object, and I can come in here and I can say, you know, I want this to be 1. Okay, and then it moves over to be 1 pixel from the left side, but I want this to be 350, right? So it's now 350 down. It doesn't matter where this is. What really matters is that at this point in time, this is 1 and this is 350. Okay, now watch this. Now I'm going to come down in here inside of my expression, and I'm going to highlight the frequency, and then I'm going to take my pickwip, and I'm going to pickwip at the x value. Okay, and it goes and gets very confusing, but all of this says is this just says inside of this composition, go find the thing called variable null, and then let's put the thing called x position of that variable null inside of here. So this is a fancy way of saying that this number currently is 1 because this number is 1, right? And then I'm going to do the same over here. So I'm going to grab this, okay, and I'm going to grab my pickwip. Don't use this pickwip. Use the pickwip in your expression menu. It's the expression pickwip. And I'm going to go Y. Okay, same thing. It says blah, 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 Y position of this null object. Okay, now the cool thing is this, right? So it's going to go and it's going to do once a second at 350 pixels. Okay, so the frequency is 1, the amplitude is 350. But what if I put keyframes in here and I say, you know, for this period of time, be that, but then at about 2.5 seconds, I want you to slow down to nothing. Okay, and then I want you to stay at nothing for a little while. And then after that, let's say about 4.5 seconds, I want you to pick up just a little bit. Okay, and so here's what happens. So you watch this Y position number here, and it changes. Right here it's 350. It goes down to 0. It stays 0. And then it slowly climbs up to 15. Then it stays at 15. And then I can say, I'm just going to copy 15 over. Okay, and then I'm going to say, let's go nuts, and we'll put it at like 2,000. All right, so it's going to go crazy there. Now watch the X position number. Okay, so it starts out, and then it stops, and then it starts going a little bit, and then it goes crazy, right? And I can also speed it up. So our X position in this case is the variable that is in the place of the frequency or the speed, right? And so I can say, you know, let's stay kind of slow, but then let's get crazy, and let's do like 10 times a second. Okay, and now, so it's going to start, it's going to kind of render this out real quick. Okay, so it starts slow, and it stops, and then once it starts building, it's building fast now because the variables have changed. So that's the idea. Okay, so I'm just going to leave. I'm going to take this like this, and I'm just going to leave this to. I'm just going to delete all these real quick. Okay, so let's set everything up. All right, I just want to show you how each one of these things does. So my opacity, I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to alt click, and I'm going to go wiggle. Okay, and then I'm going to go X, comma, Y, or whatever. It doesn't really matter what you put there, just that you have something to highlight. And then I'm going to grab the X position. Okay, and I'm going to highlight the Y, and I'm going to grab the Y position. Okay, and then I click away from this, and now, okay, opacity is freaking out because this is super fast. But if I take this down to 0.5, and I take this down to 100, okay, now it's just going to, the X position wiggles back and forth, and the opacity kind of oscillates slowly, right? If I take this to like 250 or 205, I guess is fine. It'll kind of circulate a little bit more. And if I take this up to 3, then it'll go faster. So you notice that I'm controlling the opacity of this, but I'm not actually putting any keyframes inside of this, and this is variable. Okay. Now here's the cool thing. I don't need to type this in or pickwip this each time. I can actually just copy this to my clipboard like that. And on scale, I can hit S, and I can alt click, and I can Command V on a PC or Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC. Okay. On rotation, I can hit that, and I hit R, and I can alt click here. I can paste that on rotation. And on X position here, or Y position, I can hit P. Okay, and let's separate dimensions here, like so. And then we'll go Y, alt click, paste. Okay, now the cool thing is, now all of these things, okay, are being controlled by the one thing. And so if I want it to go faster, I can say, let's go faster. Let's go 15 times per second. Okay, and then over here, I can add another one, and then I can say, oh, let's slow it down a little bit to 0.5, so half a time per second. Okay, and then we'll kind of play this out. I'm going to move these a little bit so we can see, whoop, like that. Okay, now watch, each different thing is affected by this, even though there are no keyframes in anything except the null object. And so it'll speed up, it'll slow down, it'll increase, it'll decrease, it'll do whatever you want it to do based on these variables. So that's pretty cool. Okay, there's some other stuff that you can do with this, but this is pretty neat. Okay, now I want to show you something that might seem kind of confusing. Okay, but let's go back to our chalkboard here, and I'm just gonna start over. So let's go like this, and we'll drop some black in there. Okay, so if I do something like this, and this is where you get, this is where it might be a little intimidating, but don't worry, okay? So if I say A equals 2 and B equals 3, right? And we do A plus B equals C, okay, then C equals 5, right? But what if I say something like this? I put parentheses around this, and I say, let's do, A again, and we'll times that by A plus B. So you'd say A plus B is 5, and then A again is 2, and so C would equal 10, right? Because you're multiplying that. So here's the reason that I say this, okay, is if we go over here and we have our null object, okay, and it's spitting out all these values and everything, okay, and then over here I say, in rotation, okay, it's going crazy, so I need to slow it down. Well, I can take that whole expression here and I can divide it by 2 or something, and then it'll be half as much, right? Or I can multiply it by whatever and it'll be more, okay? So if I come in here and I say, I don't know, let's watch this for a minute. That rotation is just rotating too much. I'd like it to rotate less, okay? Well, the amplitude is going to control how much it rotates. So I'm just going to close all these down here by hitting U, okay? And I'm going to go to rotation, and I'm going to hit R to kind of open that up, twirl into that menu, and I'm going to find my comma, and inside that, so here's where that starts, I'm going to put the beginning of a parentheses, okay, and at the end of that I'm going to put the end of the parentheses, and then I'm going to divide it by 3, okay, and so now it's divided by 3, and if I click out of this, it will now use that same thing, but you notice that it's rotating less, it's not going as much, and that's because even though these are spitting out bigger numbers, like this null variable is whatever this is, 200, right? It's now a third of 200, and so you can add in those type of variables as well, which is really interesting. Okay, now this is also useful if I were to say that I want certain things to move together. So for example, in our little example on the right, this robot that Scott Cirkland designed, you'll see the tire compress a little bit and he bounces. And when it compresses and bounces, there's a lot of other stuff that happens with that. But I controlled it all with one thing. And so when the tire compresses, then you'll see that the Y value of the position is affected on a number of other objects. And so he goes up and down, and his shocks compress and his head bounces, and the position of everything is affected by the scale of that tire, because I can pick whip not just null objects, but anything. And so I can say, you know what, when the tire scales on Y, let's have the body move vertically, that way. So I'll do position. So this is how I do that. Let me just, instead of just talking through it, since this is a visual medium, let's do it that way. So I'm going to just take this and let's just do this. So if I have this guy here, right, we'll call him A, okay, and then I've got this guy here, and we'll call him B, okay. If I've got my anchor point down here, and this one scales on Y, okay, and this one moves on Y. What I can do is I can pick whip the scale, and I can figure out what to multiply that by or divide it by to make it so that the movement feels the same, right? And so this because its position is going to be in pixels, and this is going to be in, because it scales, it's going to be in degrees or percentages, right? And so I'm going to say, that this has like a 20% squish. Okay, so it goes, that just means it goes from like, it's going to range between like, from 100 to 80 or whatever. But I want this to move more than that. Well, I can say, pickwip this variable inside of this expression and then multiply it by something, 5 or whatever. And then that 20 becomes 100 pixels, right? That 20% becomes 100 pixels as you translate that over. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. But anyway, as always, you can always check out my website at corykerr.com to see the stuff that I'm working on. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that jazz, and we will catch you guys later.